For most of the last century, Hong Kong was not really a city. It was a promise. 7 million people stacked vertically against a wall of green mountains, a harbor that never slept, and an idea so powerful that entire fortunes were built on it. That here, on this small strip of contested land, the rules were different. Money could move freely, contracts meant something, the East could meet the West, and neither side had to win. People believed that promise so completely that they organized their lives around it. They moved their families, their companies, their savings, their futures. They treated Hong Kong the way you treat gravity, as a fact, not a choice. But promises are not facts, and the most dangerous moment for any promise is the moment everyone stops checking whether it still holds. What we are about to trace is not a riot. It is not a market crash. It is not the headline you have already seen. It is something slower, and in some ways more final than any of those things. It is the story of how the busiest financial harbor in Asia began to empty out, not all at once, not loudly, but in the quiet, deliberate way that the people with the most to lose always move first. If you want to watch the great centers of power come undone before the rest of the world is willing to admit it, subscribe. Empire Falls documents the declines that the financial press is too invested and too polite to name. To understand what is leaving Hong Kong, you first have to understand what Hong Kong was actually selling. Because it was never really selling skyscrapers or harbor views or dim sum at 2 in the morning. Those were the decor. What Hong Kong sold was trust in a system, a Western-style legal framework, an independent currency peg, the free movement of capital, and an unspoken guarantee that what you brought in, you could always take back out. For decades, that single proposition made it the indispensable doorway between the world's largest emerging market and the world's deepest pools of capital. Everyone who wanted into China and everyone who wanted out of it came through the same door. That was the entire business model, not a product, a position. This did not happen by accident. After the Second World War, while much of Asia was rebuilding from devastation, Hong Kong made a peculiar bet. It had no oil, no farmland to speak of, no natural resources beyond a deep-water harbor, and a population willing to work. So it sold the one thing it could manufacture out of thin air: reliability, low taxes, light regulation, British common law, a judiciary that, for all its imperfections, answered to precedent rather than to politics. Through the textile booms of the 1950s, the manufacturing surge of the 60s and 70s, and the financial explosion that followed, the formula compounded. By the 1990s, Hong Kong was not a city that happened to have banks, it was a banking system that happened to have a city wrapped around it. And when the handover came in 1997, the world was told the formula was safe. One country, two systems, 50 years of guaranteed autonomy. The door would stay open until at least 2047. The promise was renewed, stamped, and filed away, and almost everyone stopped checking it. The first crack did not appear in a courtroom or a parliament. It appeared, as these things often do, in the most honest indicator a society has, where people choose to put their feet. Between 2020 and 2023, Hong Kong's population did something it had not done in its modern history. It shrank, not from a famine, not from a war, but from departure. Hundreds of thousands of residents left in a span of few years. The United Kingdom opened a special visa pathway and saw applications stream in by the hundreds of thousands. Canada and Australia recorded their own waves. The airport, once a symbol of arrival, quietly became a symbol of exit. The official explanation was the pandemic, temporary, cyclical, a blip that would reverse the moment borders reopened. And there is some truth in that. Every story like this comes with a convenient cyclical excuse layered on top of the structural one, but the people who move capital for a living were reading a different signal. Because it was not only families leaving, it was head offices. Multinational firms that had used Hong Kong as their Asian command center for decades began relocating senior staff and regional headquarters elsewhere. The number of companies running their Asia-Pacific operations out of the city stopped climbing and started to slide. That is not a blip. A blip does not move a corporate headquarters. So what was actually driving it? Here the story splits into two threads, and the obvious one is not the most important one. The obvious thread is political. In 2020, a sweeping national security law reshaped the boundaries of what could be said, published, and organized in Hong Kong. To some, this restored order after a period of upheaval. To others, it signaled that the firewall between Hong Kong's system and the mainland's had become permeable. For the purposes of this analysis, the moral argument doesn't matter. What matters is what Capital concluded, and Capital concluded that the rules might now be subject to change without notice. And the one thing every fortune fears more than high taxes is uncertainty about the rules. But the deeper thread, the one that may outlast every headline, is structural. Hong Kong's entire value rested on being different from the mainland, a separate legal space, a separate financial space, a separate guarantee. The closer those two systems move together, the less reason there is to pay Hong Kong's enormous premium for a doorway that is slowly becoming just another room in the same house. When the thing you are selling is separateness, convergence is not a policy. It is an existential event. You can see this in the numbers the boosters work hardest to reframe. For years, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange was a contender for the busiest listing venue on the planet. Then the pipeline thinned. In several recent years, the value of new public offerings fell dramatically from its peaks, ceding ground to rivals. The local benchmark index spent long stretches trading below where it had been a quarter century earlier, a generation of investors who, on paper, had gone nowhere. Office vacancy in the prime central districts, once almost unthinkable, climbed into double digits and stayed there. And the people who advise the wealthy speak, off the record, with a candor they never use on stage. Several private bankers and family office advisors have described the same quiet pattern. Clients who are not panicking, not making statements, simply re-domiciling. Opening the Singapore account, moving the family trust, keeping the Hong Kong apartment, for now, but moving the decision-making somewhere else. There is a precedent for this older than any modern market. When Venice's trade monopoly was broken by the opening of the Atlantic routes, its merchants did not wait for a royal decree to confirm their decline. They read the movement of ships and the shifting of routes, and they redeployed. The city kept its palaces for centuries. It just stopped being the place where the future was decided. Hong Kong is not Venice, but the instinct of capital to leave before the announcement is as old as commerce itself. And here is the reframe that the city's own boosters cannot afford to say out loud: a financial center does not actually run on buildings, or even on money. It runs on belief, the shared, self-reinforcing conviction that this is where serious things happen, and therefore where serious people must be. That belief is the real asset. It is invisible. It never appears on a balance sheet, and it is almost impossible to rebuild once it cracks. For most of its modern life, Hong Kong had that belief in surplus. The talent came because the capital was there. The capital came because the talent was there, and the whole system spun faster every year on its own momentum. But that flywheel runs in both directions. When the senior banker relocates to Singapore, the junior talent follows the promotions. When the talent thins, the next listing chooses a different venue. When the listings move, the reason to keep a regional headquarters weakens. Each departure makes the next one slightly more rational. When a city stops being where the future is decided and becomes merely where the past is administered, its decline has already begun, long before the skyline shows a single crack. I've assembled the full framework behind this. The 4 early warning signals that a financial capital is entering its long afternoon, and the map of where the next decade of Asian capital is actually being decided, into a companion guide. The link is in the description, and the code is on your screen now. But stay here, because the last thing this city reveals, the pattern that no government communique will ever name, is the one that tells you not just where Hong Kong is going, but where every city built on a single guarantee is going next. Hong Kong's government is not standing still. There are talent attraction visas, new investment migration schemes, festivals, mega events, and earnest campaigns insisting the city is back. These are not nothing, but notice what they have in common. Every one of them is an attempt to re-advertise the promise rather than to rebuild the thing the promise was based on. You can market belief. You cannot manufacture it. Belief is downstream of the rules, and the rules are exactly what the market is no longer certain of. This is the structural trap of any place built on a single proposition. A city that defines itself by one irreplaceable advantage becomes utterly dependent on that advantage remaining irreplaceable. The moment the world can get the same thing somewhere else, with less risk, or more space, or fewer questions about the rules, the premium evaporates, and the ultra-mobile, the people and firms with options, are always the first to do the math. They do not hold press conferences. They do not write op-eds. They file paperwork in a friendlier jurisdiction. They tell the relocation firm to find a flat in another harbor. And they begin making their most important decisions from a different time zone. The buildings stay. The lights stay on. The headline arrives years later. If it arrives at all, Rome did not feel itself fall. The taxes still flowed, the forums still filled, the games still ran, long after the real decisions had moved to other capitals. The empire was declared eternal right up until it wasn't, and historians spent centuries explaining what should have been obvious to anyone watching the roads. Hong Kong is not Rome. Its story will not be measured in legions, but in regional headquarters re-registered elsewhere, in IPOs that choose a different exchange, in the quiet difference between a city where capital lives and a city where capital merely keeps an address. The harbor is still there. The lights still come on at dusk in their thousand-window cascade. The ferries still cross, the markets still open, and the city will still, for years, look exactly like the capital of the future. But the people who decide where the future actually happens are increasingly deciding it somewhere else. They are not announcing it, they are just quietly leaving. That is how it always goes. Not with a collapse, with a forwarding address. Empires do not fall in a single year. They fall in patterns, patterns visible in every century and every city, to anyone willing to watch where the powerful put their feet when they think no one is counting. The next city to enter its long afternoon may be one you know intimately, one where you've lived, or worked, or imagined spending the years ahead. The pattern repeats. It always has. The only variable is where. Tell us in the comments which city you think enters its long afternoon next. We read everyone. And subscribe, because the next chapter of Empire Falls is already loaded.